All right, folks, here we are back again. I'm Bryce. Welcome to whatever medium you might be listening or watching this on. For today's conversation, I'm going to talk about Renfield, the newest movie from director Chris McKay, whose work I'm honestly not too familiar with, but starring Nicholas Hoult and also Nicolas Cage alongside Awkwafina. Those are probably the three biggest names in this movie, and they all serve it quite well, but I'll touch upon that in just a second. So what are we getting into with Renfield? Basically, if you've seen the trailers, you'll know that Nicholas Hoult plays, I believe his name is Chris Montague Renfield, as he says his name a couple of times in the movie. And basically, he was manipulated at a young age to become Dracula's henchman, to become his servant in order to feed him people so that he can continue to grow to full power despite so many members, different clergymen, different citizens, different law enforcement officials of society trying to take him down for many, many years, probably in the hundreds of years. They don't really specify for how long, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The movie overall is as ridiculous as it sounds. The official synopsis from IMDb I don't think is quite as robust. It basically states Renfield, Dracula's henchman and inmate at the lunatic asylum for decades, longs for a life away from the Count, his various demands, and all of the bloodshed that comes with them. So I would say about half of that is true. I think the most interesting part of this movie, one, comes into the conversation about good versus evil and what that really means. And the other part is the part of the synopsis that talks about Renfield longing for a life that's different from the one that he has gotten himself into. So that's pretty much what you're getting into this movie with in a nutshell. I went and saw it twice over the weekend. I saw it twice by accident, I would say. I ended up going, I think, on Saturday afternoon. For my first viewing, I was going to go with a friend, but that didn't pan out, so I just said, fuck it, I'm going to go see it. The second time, I actually woke up on Sunday, and a different friend asked me if I wanted to go see it with him. I enjoyed it very much so my first time around, so I said, what the hell, I'll give it a second shot and just go have some fun with it. My first viewing, I enjoyed the movie a lot more. I think that Nicolas Cage is having so much fun playing Dracula. You can tell in one scene in particular where he has an encounter with Renfield that he's really fully leaning into his desire to play this role. It comes off really well. It comes off really intensely. You can really feel that Dracula is an asshole. Nicolas Cage really sells it, and I think it makes the movie a lot better for it. On the other hand, I would say that most of the screen time is going to be occupied by Nicholas Hoult's character, which is Renfield, and also Awkwafina, who plays Rebecca Quincy, a police officer. She goes by Officer Quincy. I wouldn't be surprised if she was like a sergeant of some kind, but nevertheless, most of your screen time is going to be occupied by the latter two. And their chemistry, I thought, was really adorable, and I thought it made the movie really work. I mean, I guess that's kind of the caveat with any movie, right? If your leads are poor with each other or just poor performances within it, it really dampers the experience. However, with these two, I really felt that they offered their own DNA to the movie, and it really made it interesting when it came to the morality dilemmas that they face, especially in terms of corruption and good and evil, which I'll touch upon in just a bit, as well as the comedy within the movie. I think where Chris McKay really nails this movie's experiences in the comedy, which is no surprise, because if I pull up IMDb here, looking at Chris McKay's tenure, as it were, the three most recent big films he's directed include The Tomorrow War, which is a bit more of a serious endeavor, but the Lego Batman movie and the Lego movie, which I would argue are more on the comedic side of things. He does a great job of bringing that sensibility to the comedy of this movie. The movie isn't so wink, wink, nudge, nudge, which is what I'd compare to Marvel's style of humor. I know, I'm sorry, I am a hater on Marvel's humor. I don't think it really works all that well, at least not all the time. I think the humor here is a little bit smarter. It's a little bit more clever, especially when it comes to the lore about Dracula and vampires. For those of you who do not know the lore of Dracula and vampires, you might miss a wink, wink, nudge, nudge within this movie at some points. Like, I missed one of them, but at the same time, I learned some other mythology around Dracula, which I think added into the comedic bits of this movie, which I thought was excellent. Aside from that, Awkwafina and Nicholas Hoult, where the chemistry also came in handy, was in the action scenes as well, which is, I guess, where I'll touch upon next. Renfield's action scenes, there are two major ones and two minor ones, I would say. There is a minor one toward the middle of this movie. There's another minor one toward the end, and then there's a major one in between those two spots. I wasn't really expecting the action to feel so gratuitous and fun, and I would say that it does a good job of encompassing my thoughts on this movie as a whole. The movie is very fun. It is meant to be an absurd, over-the-top, I don't want to call it satire, but it's meant to be absurd, over-the-top, funny, and just meant to give you a good popcorn eating time. You're not really supposed to think too much about it, although it does take jabs at doing aforementioned points that I've already touched upon earlier. But the action scenes, if I had to describe them, they're completely bloody disgusting. They're so over-the-top that you might laugh at how crazy the blood gets and the carnage and the dismemberment. It gets really grotesque, and I've never seen so much fake blood and CG used in violence like this before, other than James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which came out in 2019, 2020, 2021. I can't remember, whatever the pandemic was. And for whatever reason, it just really elevated the experience for me, because it made the movie's pacing go by a little bit faster. I know this movie isn't very long since it's only an hour and 33 minutes, but when the movie can just get me to completely turn off my brain and just have fun and laugh at the absurdity of what's going on, I really appreciate it for that. And I think that's what the action scenes did for me. And the action scenes were just so creative. You really got to see what Renfield can actually do, and you got to see the rules that the movie sets out put to work, and I just thought that was really fun and funny. At some points, they do a good job of balancing out the action with some of their comedic bits at a lot of other points, and I would say that it probably made for some of the best scenes in the movie overall too, not just the action points. So the action, you won't go into this movie looking for that, but I think you'll be surprised at how well it's done by the time you get out of it. Aside from that, I want to talk about the pacing of this movie. The first time around watching this, I didn't really mind the pacing. Having said that, when I walked out of the movie and I found out that the runtime was 1 hour 33 minutes, I was actually kind of surprised. The movie felt closer to about an hour 45, maybe a little bit more than that, and I couldn't quite pinpoint what the deal was or why I felt that way up until my second viewing, which I'll touch upon in just a second. But if you walked out of this movie saying that felt a lot longer than an hour and 30 minutes, I wouldn't be surprised. It just slows down quite a bit, I would say, in about the last third. There is the sequence of 2 or 3 scenes that are kind of strung together. That's a transition period between one big action scene moment and also the ultimate the conclusion of the movie, as it were. So it really does lend itself to being a little slow at times, which will happen. It was just a really big shame, because I think it would have really bumped up my enjoyment of the movie if just sped up a little bit more, I guess you could say. Aside from that, I did want to give a shout to both. I mean, I could commend the performances of Nicholas Cage, Nicholas Hoult, and Awkwafina, but for whatever reason, I think Awkwafina really stuck out to me in this movie. I think she really leans into her own DNA in this movie, which I think really makes her character work. She is a very spirited individual. You can see that in her other performances, like she is with Crazy Rich Asians, between Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And I think that she shows off both her dramatic and her comedic chops in such a way that is perfect for this movie. And I think that this was superb casting by whomever the casting director was. Let me jump on over to IMDb and see who that may have been. Let's see if IMDb won't let me down here. I won't spend too much time on this, because otherwise that'd just be ridiculous. I can't find it. But anyways, I thought the casting of Awkwafina, I thought, was pretty perfect in this movie. Also of Nicolas Cage and also of Nicholas Hoult. So I guess it's a roundabout way of crediting the casting of this movie in this sort of manner. So take that for what it's worth, but you won't be disappointed with any of the 3 actors that I've mentioned already. And it's not to say that the other actors aren't good. It's just they weren't really at top of mind in this movie. They serve their purpose. They do just fine, but it's very evident that the stars of the show are Nicholas Hoult, Awkwafina, and Nicolas Cage. Actually, Nicolas Cage to a lesser extent, but still a major character nonetheless. So those are pretty much all of my thoughts about the first viewing. After watching this initially, I would give this movie an 8 out of 10. I thought it was a great experience. I had very few issues with it. And I just had a lot of fun at the movies, and I think that's what this movie will ultimately serve up to by the time it's all said and done. If you're a big fan of Nicolas Cage, you're going to like this movie. If you are a fan of Awkwafina and her comedy, you're going to like this movie. If you like Nicholas Hoult, you're also going to like this movie. And if you like vampires and really gross, bloody, gory action, this movie will also serve that purpose. So those are my thoughts after the first viewing. They slightly changed after my second viewing. So my second viewing, I didn't like the movie nearly as much. In fact, it was so much so to the point where I would change my mind on the score of the film from an 8 out of 10 to a 6 out of 10. I could have been persuaded to be a 7 out of 10, but I think that would be me being too nice to this movie, I think. The second time around, I think the absurdity of the movie got a little bit old. What I mean by that is the absurdity in the action was fine. I didn't mind the dismemberment, the over-the-top blood and grotesqueness of it all. I think that it really added to the experience. Having said that, there is a conversation in this movie about the idea of corruption and good and evil. In fact, it was so blatantly obvious, and this isn't a con of the film, I want to be clear about that. It was so blatantly obvious to the film that I couldn't help but think of Gotham City, specifically Gotham City in The Batman, the one that came out last year, or Christopher Nolan's trilogy. They talk about New Orleans, because that's what this movie takes place in, is so, like, being so corrupt, being so out of order to the point where a very important person in Rebecca Quincy's life, who's played by Awkwafina, gets killed and no one does anything about it. Having said that, I think the movie cheaply cuts a lot of corners and makes it so that the corruption is over the top. Like, it's to the point where the police officers of New Orleans are working together with another certain character for basically no reason at all. Just because the movie says, oh, because this antagonist is all powerful and has the whole city in their pocket. Like, I didn't buy into that. I didn't believe it. It really hurt the integrity of the movie for me. In fact, if they just took out the corruption, I don't want to say if they took out the corruption piece. If they didn't introduce so many policemen in this movie and more so the antagonist's army, I think it would have made the movie a little bit better. But in a lot of these action sequences, there's so many police everywhere to the point where I'm like, am I really buying that the police and the antagonists are working hand in hand? Not a fucking chance. Like, it was so blatantly absurd that it just really downplayed the experience for me, and I think made for one of the worst parts of the film. Having said that, the conversations that the movie attempts to have about corruption, the battle of good versus evil, why it's important to stand up for yourself, the idea that toxic relationships are not worth being a part of, I think are all phenomenal messages and central themes in the movie, especially the piece about being in toxic relationships, the toxic relationship being Renfield and Dracula, and doing everything you can and what you can do in your power to get out of that. And I think that the movie had a certain endearment about it within that area that I really appreciated and helped elevate the experience for me. Having said that, actually, no, I'm not even going to say having said that. It just made the experience overall better for me. For me, I like an exploration of morality, of ethics in films in order to adapt them to my own life. That's just who I am. That's just a big reason why I watch movies, is to adapt them, the lessons learned in my own life. And I think that this movie did have some of that there, or at least tried to have the conversation, which I appreciated, even though it didn't get too deep into it. So it's a surprising element to the movie that I wasn't expecting, along with the action that really kept me on my toes and thought, they're really attempting to try to convey something to us, or the director might be trying to convey the way they feel about this particular topic to us as well. I mean, they're all artists, right? Maybe that's their way of conveying their life to us and the lessons they learned along the way, which is kind of fun. So I know I've talked a little bit about the pacing on my first viewing, but on my second viewing, I think the movie dragged on like a lot more slowly. I think that might be true no matter, I guess my caveat with that is that might be true no matter what movie you watch a second, third, fourth, fifth time, because you know what's happening. The element of surprise is gone. Therefore, the experience is naturally going to drag on a little bit more. However, I really felt that third act drag on a lot more than I ever wanted to. I mean, these characters were talking to each other. They were taking forever. At one point, I thought I was watching a rendition of Twilight and the vampires that they have in that movie. This isn't a spoiler discussion. I never do spoilers, so don't worry too much. If you watch the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. It was just very strange, and by the time the movie was over, I'm like, oh my god, how is this an hour and 33 minutes? That felt like closer to 2 hours, which, take that for what it's worth. If one of the points that I have about a movie's critiquing is the fact that its pacing isn't that great, it means that the movie was probably a pretty good time. If it wasn't for the absurdity and the idea around the corruption of this film, I think I would have given this second viewing a 7 out of 10, but which is how absurd that was and how much slower my second viewing felt. It really notched down the score for me overall to a 6 out of 10. So take that for whatever it might be worth. But so to kind of wrap this up overall, if I've got to summarize my experience between my two viewings, I'm going to say that this movie will average them out 7 out of 10. I would absolutely recommend seeing it. You're going to have a lot of fun with this with your friends. I highly encourage you to go see it, because the more money that these movies make, the more movies like this get made. That's just a fact of Hollywood. They follow the money. We need more. I love seeing original stories get made, so I guess I'm a little biased here, but I encourage you to go see it with your friends. Go have some fun. You're going to laugh a little bit. You're going to be awed at the absurdity that goes on in this film. Nicholas Hoult really plays into his DNA. So does Nicolas Cage and Awkwafina. So if you like any of those three, you're going to have fun with it. It's only an hour and 33 minutes, so if you're looking to kill a little bit of time, this is going to be perfect for you, even if it feels a little bit longer than that. Don't worry, hour 33 minutes. There is no post-credit or mid-credit scene. That's one disclaimer I like to give people, because I, like an idiot, love to just sit around to the very end of the credits way too many times only to be disappointed. Don't be like me. Leave before the credits end or right after the credits start to roll. You'll save yourself some time. If you enjoy some mild conversation about good versus evil, corruption, getting out of toxic relationships, but portrayed in a funny way, this movie is also good for that use case. I would not recommend this movie to children, but then again, they're not my kids. I don't know what you do with your kids, what you decide they can see and not see, so take that for what it's worth. Just know that there's a lot of bloody violence, gore, swearing, a lot of fuck bombs, which actually serve the movie to be really funny as well. So that'll do it for my conversation. This was a lot of fun, so I hope you all go see Renfield. If you've seen it and want to talk about it, please drop a comment below. I'd love to know what you thought about it, or maybe what you didn't like about it if the movie just wasn't your cup of tea. To be honest, I'd be surprised if anybody's listening or watching this right now, because the movie only made $7.5 million opening weekend, maybe a little bit more of that domestically. But if you are one of the happy few like myself who saw it, maybe even twice, let me know what you thought about it. I'd love to hear from you. So that'll do it for me, friends. Until the next time, I hope you have a fantastic day, fantastic week. I've been Bryce, and we'll see you later.